Balatro. Have I been saying it wrong this whole? I've been emphasizing I've been saying Balatro. Is a Balatro the official? Is that canon?
You can say it however you want to say it. The way that I say it is not the correct way. It's just the way that I say it.
I called it Baltaro for about a week, so you know.
Probably not that.
Okay, fair enough. In February of 2024, a card game called Balatro landed on Steam, and work-from-home productivity among sicko gamers plummeted back to pandemic levels. Balatro, or Balatro as I've been instructed to call it, is a game where you play simple poker hands in order to score points and then progress to levels where higher points are required. Sounds like a video game. It's one of those games that starts with simple rules and then begins to layer on new delicious layers of complexity. Things like upgrades to individual cards which change how many points they score, or joker cards that can create insane multipliers if certain cards or combinations of cards are played. Soon enough, you're scoring insanely high numbers and chasing increasingly difficult win conditions. Balatro is interesting enough in its own right, but as is so often the case, the story behind its development is similarly fascinating. The game was made entirely by a single Canadian developer who goes by the name LocalThunk. He doesn't post his real name, and during our interview he had his webcam off. In our conversation, I asked him about this desire for anonymity, alongside questions about his unique development story, where the concept for Balatro grew from, the game's music, art style, and video poker vibe, the trouble he's run into with regulators due to the game's gambling aesthetics, and the jobs he had before games development. One in particular is perhaps the most Canadian job you can possibly imagine. This interview was recorded in March of 2024, a few short weeks after the game had blown up on Steam, and back when I was still pronouncing the game's name like an uneducated peasant. Balatro, maybe I'll make the transition during this podcast, I'm saying it that way. Balatro, I know it's always hard to go backwards, especially when you've reached a sort of a creative endpoint that you were satisfied with. But do you remember some of the directions that the game went in during that initial ideation?
So right at the start, the idea was to play a version of Big Two, which is like a normal playing card game, with my friends, because my friends used to play that with me when I was like in high school and university. And I wanted to play it during the pandemic. I wanted to play with them. So I thought, hey, I could make an online version of it. Not like a roguelike, not, doesn't have any of this fancy stuff, but literally just the same version of the card game we played. In the first couple weeks of making that, I started coming up with all these other ideas, and I abandoned that idea. So initially, technically, yes, it was designed to be that, but I wouldn't say it was Balatro at that point.
Right.
It was unrecognizable. There were no jokers, first of all. So the original idea of that game was that you upgrade your cards. So your playing cards in your deck were really the entire strategy around the game. And, none of that exists anymore. But that was kind of the original idea. And, looking back, I realized that I iterated so much from that original idea that it's unrecognizable at this point. So like that was the whole point. It was the iterating was the reason why I was making the game. It wasn't like a struggle or anything like that. It was just kind of part of it.
Was it a fun game to sort of mess around with as well? Because I guess on one fundamental level, I know there's a lot that goes into a finished game, art and sound and stuff like that. But from a design perspective, you're sort of just changing values a lot, I guess, and combinations and logic and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Was it easy to sort of fuck around and find out, as it were?
Well, that bit is, I kind of put that under the umbrella of balance. Those don't seem like design changes to me. So the design changes would be, like at one point there was a different currency for rerolls instead of money. Stuff like that, messing around with those types of things this is the most rewarding project I've ever worked on in that sense.
How did it evolve over the development? It sounds like you sort of, we'll get to the commercializing aspect of it later, but from a creative standpoint, what was the wind that pushed it in a new direction?
I was watching Northern Lion play Luck Be a Landlord at the time.
Playing Luck Be a Landlord. This was recommended by chat yesterday. It is a new roguelite. It is a deck builder. It is a slot machine. It is an indie game. It's everything. It's everything you want. It's all that in a bag of potato chips.
And there's like a lot of, I've had a lot of time to analyze it since then. There's a lot of reasons why that game, I think, connected with me on a design level. Because I don't really play a lot of indie games or like fantasy type games, just because I'm so put off by those themes, I think, normally. And the fact that you're not fighting an enemy, you're just like, it's like a rising tide type of game. I'd never seen any like clicker games, idle games, which probably I would feel the same way about those as well. But that was my first exposure to it. And I just thought it was so clever, a lot of the design elements of it. And it really inspired me to make kind of my own take on a real life game with a score attack spin. So after that, I basically cut off. I never played the game. I didn't want to watch any more videos about it or any adjacent games because I wanted to explore the space myself. I just thought it was so interesting. So right at the beginning, definitely that game. But then after that, I tried to cut myself off for the most part.
Does that mean games like Marvel Snap or Slay the Spire or any other type of like deck games? Did you ever play much of those?
So both of those games, my experience with them, I've never played or seen Marvel Snap. I have read a little bit about the design ideas from one of the creators of it, I think. And I agree with a lot of the sentiments behind that game. But I've never played it. I've never seen it played. Slay the Spire, I have a friend that a few months into development of Balatro was... he's one of the main people I wanted to make the game for. And he was telling me he's a huge Slay the Spire fan. He was telling me things about that game. And, I didn't really understand because I think it's hard to describe a deck builder to someone that hasn't played it before. So I knew that it existed and I knew that it was like the bar for deck builders. Like it was the gold standard. So I intentionally avoided that one until about 10 months ago. I was adding controller support to Balatro pretty much after the design was done of the game, and I didn't know how to do it properly. So I was like, I'm just going to get that game, see what they did, avoid their pitfalls, and I loved the game. So I played it a lot when I did that. I learned a lot, and it helped me implement my controls. But I played it so much, and it's just such a clever game, and I'm so certain that if I played it before I explored this design space, it would have infiltrated a lot of the thought processes.
I'm always interested in the games that got somebody to the game we're talking about. Can you tell us a little bit about the games you've made in the past? Because if I do my little Moby Games search, all I see is Balatro, and I'm like, there's no way that's your first game.
Yeah, so I think my journey from what I've seen now that the game's in public is maybe a little atypical in that, I spent a lot of time creating projects in my own spare time and not like making them super polished or nice. So I've been making games or like simulations for a little under 10 years.
Okay.
Some of those games are, like little month-long projects. One of them was like 2.5 years of work.
Right.
Like the one that got me into it, at the time I was in university and I was watching Europa Universalis 4, which is like Risk, like a grand strategy game by Paradox. I was watching Northern Line play it, and it got my gears turning. And at the time I was learning some game engine stuff with C++ because I enjoy the low level control and that side of it because I was really into programming at the time. So I thought I could make like a Risk type game with like cellular automata and realistic countries, the entire world, and like population density maps and elevation maps that change combats. And so that was like the first big game that I worked on. Yeah, but again, that was only for me and for some of my friends and family. So they're the only people that have ever seen it.
When you were working on those, were you know, was this a creative incubation process? Were you thinking maybe I'll release one of these and then your attention gets dragged somewhere else? Like what was the initial point of some of those ones, and how did you end up sort of moving away from them?
No, the thought had never crossed my mind, to be honest with you. It was, I just liked doing it. I would stay up until like 4 a.m, just like working on these games because I thought it was fun. It's interesting because, yeah, you know, the reason why I would make a game is because I enjoy the process so much. So that's kind of when I discovered how much I love the process of making a game. So that's how it started. And I think I've kind of held on to that belief as well.
Does that allow you sort of a creative freedom that you wouldn't get otherwise, because you're not thinking, you know, I need to position the game this way, or players won't like this aspect, or they might find this hard?
Yeah, it's actually, it really helps me reframe whenever I hear praise or criticism, or I just think to what end am I doing this? And the answer's always been the same. It's because I want to make a game that A, I want to play, that I think is interesting, and B, that I want to make, because I just enjoy creating it so much. So it has really helped, I think, cut through a lot of the noise. And there's tons of other motivations why I could make changes in Balatro, but that's definitely helped. I've held on to that. It's helped be my North Star, I guess.
Can you say what your day job was during this whole time? Were you working in tech or engineering or anything like that?
Well, so when I first started, I was in school for, it's like mechanical engineering. So it's not a software practice. And I was like halfway through my degree, and I was coding a lot in my spare time. I was doing like little temperature simulations and evolutionary algorithm type simulation things that interested me. I wanted to get kind of into data science at the time. And I was doing it so much in my spare time that I dropped out of engineering in my final year and switched into computer science because I knew that's kind of what I wanted to pursue. So I did that. And at the time I was working as a Zamboni driver for the city that I was in.
You're kidding.
Yeah, that's what was my, that's kind of what paid the bills at the time. So
that's incredible. Oh my God. Like, how many Zamboni drivers are there in the world? I'm thinking like that's what I guess there's probably lots in Canada now that I think about it.
The concentration in Canada is a lot higher.
That's incredible. Okay, I have to ask you about this then. So Zamboni driver, are you mostly just driving it? Do you have to maintain the Zamboni? Is there, how hard is it to do it?
Honestly, it's less Zamboni driving and more janitor work, which actually I found to be the fun part of the job. It was very relaxing and rewarding in a lot of ways because you could see the work that you did. So yeah, it was a really good job.
I would ask you what team you support, but that's just going to give away where you live.
I won't. Which, like, hockey team?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, what's your favorite hockey team?
I'm a big fan of the Minnesota Wild, and I live in Canada, so that doesn't tell you anything.
Perfect. Let's talk about the vibe. Let's talk about the aesthetics. So the thing about games is that you sort of, I don't know, whenever you play a new game, you try and box it in. You try and like go, okay, how do I categorize this in the sort of the internal library of games that I know? And Balatro is very, see, I'm doing it now. It's very unique in that way. But outside of that, I was trying to think like, what is the vibe this is giving me? And then I don't think I've ever played video poker. I think I might have seen some machines before. I saw them in movies, maybe in the background of like a 70s action movie or something like that, in a hotel. That's where my brain went. But where was your brain going when you were designing the look of these cards, the sort of the whole feel, the warm sort of cozy material feel of Balatro?
Yeah, it's really interesting because this is one of the parts of the game that it's just sheer dumb luck that it turned out this way. Because I had never even seen a video poker machine before this game went public. And then I realized, so many comparisons to video poker machines. And I was like, what on earth is that? And then I looked it up and I was like, oh my God, I've like recreated this same vibe, because a lot of people were saying like, yeah, this reminds me of when I was younger, seeing people play video poker machines, or when I used to play video poker machines. So I think I accidentally captured a lot of that. And the reason that is the CRT filter, I think, is a big part of it. I just really got into making shaders, and that was one shader I wanted to make that I think looked cool in other games. So slapping that on top of it, I think that by itself was enough to push it into like, oh, this looks like video, like weird interdimensional fucked up video poker.
What about the design of the cards? So am I right in saying that you also did all the art for this game?
Yes, I did all the art except for one card. I had a guest artist do the Vagabond Joker, but everything else, yes, I did myself.
That was the pixel artist Lumpy Touch, right?
Yes, that's right.
Very cool.
He did an awesome job with that one too. People love that card. So,
have you always been, always been talented at art as well as engineering and programming?
Well, art's really the main thing that it's what I wanted to get into instead of engineering after high school. To be honest, I was in an art program in high school. I've always enjoyed making art since I was like a kid. So right at the start, I made this framework where cards had to be a certain resolution. They had to adhere by a bunch of different rules. So one of them is like jokers need to include the word Joker written in the art somewhere, except for the legendary ones. The color palette was quite restricted. And beyond that, the cards that I actually made were just like little parts of me, parts of my life, things that I found interesting, or things that happened to me, or places or people that I knew. So yeah, there's like a couple of years of the thoughts in my life that are put into these jokers. So, and they're cohesive, I think, because of the rules that I put in place, but the subject matter that I use is definitely not cohesive for them. I think that's really a kind of a hodgepodge.
Yeah, the jokers seem to be inherently there to break the rules. So it's interesting to have there be like a sort of cohesive box that you can operate in artistically, but then it seems like you are also within that box perhaps breaking a lot of those rules, like jokers that are torn in half, or jokers that have like completely different looks to them, but you're right, don't feel like they were taken out of a different game's card pack, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's really important to give yourself boundaries in a creative process like that, because those boundaries actually breed creativity. Because you try and think of like, you're almost puzzling, like, how can I fit an idea into this, like a new idea? And if you don't have any boundaries at all, it doesn't activate the problem solving part of your brain, at least for me. So I do feel like a lot of the cards are just like weird art, but a lot of them are also ways that I was trying to think like, how far can I push this idea? Like a sandwich shop card where they give you a hole punch every time you buy a sandwich, or like a credit card, or like what even is a card, like a business card, or those kinds of things. Yeah.
How many people have been asking for like a physical version of that deck? And do you think it'll ever happen?
Like everyone. I think it probably will happen at some point. Yeah. I personally think it's fun. So not even as just like a marketing or like a financial like thing. I just think it would be cool as well. I agree. I think it would be fun to have something like that. So I'll see what I can do.
Would it be even possible to, I guess you'd have to redesign certain elements of the game, but do you think there is like a sort of tabletop version of Balatro that is possible?
I hear this one come up a lot too. And again, for the guiding principle of this game, why am I doing it? I don't like board games. like in any capacity, really. So I just don't see why I would do something like that. I also don't think that it would translate well to a board game anyway. It's so numbers driven and there's so many calculations involved. And I think it would change the core of the game enough that it would kind of just be like a Balatro themed card game instead of it being like Balatro the board game. But regardless, I'm not a big board game fan, so I don't think that would happen.
Yeah, that's fair. It'd be like you'd have to have the calculator out. It'd be like playing darts when you're like 6 pints in, where suddenly the multiplications are just I'm done. This is too much. It's hard to rest your game soundtrack on like a theme, even if it like changes and is, it's such a good fucking song. I have woken up in the morning humming it and being like, was I dreaming about Balatro, or I don't know what's going on. How did you end up like finding is it Luis Clemente?
Yes.
How did you find this music, and then also tell us about the way it's incorporated, because it's not just like an MP3 that plays in the background. It's obviously moving and swaying with a lot of the motion of the game.
Yeah. So actually, this one of the things I learned about this game is sound design. I really, I think, sunk my teeth into sound design in a way I never had before. So a lot of this was fun, but so yeah, in March of 2023, before any of this went public, I remember this is the first money I'm spending on this game. And I was really nervous about it. And I was searching, it must have been for a month trying to find a musician on like Fiverr. I was like looking at a whole bunch of different freelance websites for musicians that make game soundtracks. And I was listening to their like samples for like a month, trying to find like the perfect kind of vibe I was going for. And I found him. And he had the song and it was like really good. And I knew like he was very talented from that. And so I got in contact with him, and, I'm sure he'll be polite about it now, but I was probably kind of a dink to him just because I was so specific with what I wanted. I had like this vision of a song, and I gave him some notes for like different soundtracks that I enjoyed, like the Risk of Rain soundtrack was an inspiration. So I gave him like probably 20 different songs. Poor guy. I gave him probably 20 different songs to do homework on, to like, these are kind of the things I'm looking for, like an odd time signature, weird chord progression, to kind of go along with like the weird hallucination vibes of the game. And he did such an incredible job with it. I'm so happy with what he was able to do. It's too bad there's only one song. I think there really can only be one song. But what he ended up giving me was all the different tracks for that song broken out. And then, so I took those tracks from that one song and I remixed it into 5 different songs. And then while you're playing the game, as it transitions to, say, the shop or a boss or a tarot or an arcana pack or a celestial pack, it brings the volume down on the previous song and increases the volume on the next song. So it kind of seamlessly transitions. That way there's no like hard stop or hard start to any of these tracks. And I did that not because I thought like, oh, I'm going to like trap people in here like it's a casino. I'm not going to put any clocks or, like that.
No windows in Balatro.
Yeah. I did it more because I thought it would be fun to make that. I just thought it was like this cool idea that some games do that. So I thought like, I want to try and do that and see if it works. And it did.
Yeah, do you think like if you pull out the music, you pull out the soundtrack, all those beautiful little snaps and the satisfying sound of a shuffle, all that juice, all the the animation work, all that sort of stuff, do you think people stick around? Like, how much do you think, obviously it's a combination of elements, but how much do you think that sort of, the juice, as it were, adds to people settling in and sort of being happy to be in that place. Because the game feels like a place. All you're doing is looking at a table. But if I was to like imagine and look up, I'm in a weird casino or in the corner of a weird bar or something like that. I can almost smell the cigarettes.
Yeah, I actually think they would probably stay the same amount of time, but it would scare people off. I spent so long getting the juice of this game to be like exactly how I wanted it. I really felt like more than anything else, this is what I was a perfectionist about, is making all the shaders for like the polychrome and the foil cards look just right and making them tilt in like the perfect amount that I think is satisfying but not distracting, and making everything sound right and things are flinging correctly and not just like linear interpolation of things. And when people first interact with it, it feels so much more like you're actually playing with playing cards that it doesn't scare them away, and it allows them to interface with some of the mechanics without just saying like, oh, this is just like some cheap, dumb card game, you know?
Shortly after Balatro's release, the game was sadly taken down off of a number of digital stores in certain territories due to PEGI, the rating agency in Europe, stating it contained prominent gambling imagery and material that instructs about gambling, something that was particularly irritating to those of us who've been beating the loot box drum for most of their careers, but that's another topic for another podcast. I wanted to ask LocalThunk about how this all went down, and more importantly, how the poker aesthetic affects the game's design in other ways, and the ways in which Balatro isn't really poker at all. Let's talk a little bit about the poker elements to this, because I can see that this is maybe helpful in some ways, in a way to communicate concepts to people, but obviously has come around to bite you in the arse a little bit with PEGI deciding to change their rating. The funny thing about Balatro is that when we first started talking about it on our crewcast, the poker thing was there because it's about poker hands is, hey, score, right? Like that's the most important thing. But aside from that, it has very little to do with poker at all. There's no bluffing. There's no other competitive element to it at all. Tell us a little bit about that. I guess, you know, whenever you moved away from basing this on Big Two, and then and towards, I guess, the version it is now. What was the sort of reason for that, and how did you land on poker as you know, an element of the game?
Well, first of all, Big Two uses poker hands. Okay, they use the same hands. So, like, fundamentally, if you strip off all like the paint from the game, it is still a Big Two based game. It's not based mechanically on poker, although because the two games do share, like Big Two and poker do share the same hand system, it's a totally apt comparison to say that it's based on poker in that sense. But technically it wasn't. It was based on Big Two mechanically. When I was creating the game, nobody knows Big Two in North America or in Europe.
Is it Chinese?
I think it's Cantonese. Okay. It's bigger in Southeast Asia, but it's just thematically, there's not a lot going on with Big Two. So poker was, you know, something close enough to Big Two where I could say like, yeah, these hands are all poker hands. And it also has a lot of really interesting, satisfying visuals and verbiage and things that I knew a general audience would be able to connect with easier than, well, maybe this is a little controversial, but I think easier than a fantasy theme like HP and Magic experience and like all those terms. I think there is a contingent of people that are more willing to interface with the game if it's talking about blinds and hands and discards and antes and all these words that are part of poker. So it was like an onboarding tool, a coat of paint to make this thing seem approachable for a particular audience, and also a way to make it cohesive thematically. Like, there's so many different terms related to poker that I could just co-opt, like stakes. I co-opted the term stake to mean something that has nothing to do with stakes. Blinds aren't really blinds. And So I was able to do all that and lean really heavily on those concepts to do some of the heavy lifting for onboarding for new players.
And I guess, what stage during this development were you aware of the fact that there could be some association with gambling, and the fact that there is, I mean, one of the funniest things I find about Balatro is the fact that you're winning like $4. Like, I find that absolutely hilarious, because most games it's about the power fantasy, right? And it's like, oh my God, it's $1 million on the line. And in this, I'm winning like $60 and losing my fucking mind. I'm so happy about it. At what stage were you sort of aware of the specter of, this maybe at a glance somebody might think this is like a gambling game?
It was pretty shortly after it went public in last summer. I started seeing some comments saying, not even in a negative way, but saying that this is a gambling game. And, I have like a lot of background in statistics, and like I worked briefly as a data scientist, and just like understanding statistics, it makes me really dislike the concept of real gambling mechanics in real life and in games. And calling it a gambling game when it's really just like a coat of paint and there's nothing really gambling about it, it bothered me a bit. But again, the whole reason why I made this game, I made it for me. I know it's not a gambling game. I'm comfortable with that fact that it has nothing to do with gambling. So if a ratings agency disagrees, that's on them.
PlayStack, your publisher, presumably was talking to some of these folks before it went live. I read somewhere that there was an initial rating from Peggy that it was 18, and then after conversations with whoever, either you or them, that it got brought down to 3. Is that true?
I think you know the same information that I do there, to be honest. I'm not really part of that process.
Let me ask you then just about how the relationship with PlayStack came around, because then presumably at some stage you've been working on all these passion projects, these simulations, these pieces of software, some of them games, some not, for a decade or so, and then you're working on this one, and then when, I guess, did you make the decision that this was something that you might make not just for you and your friends, but for a wider audience?
So that actually happened earlier on. So I was working on this game, and then it's been about 2 years and a few months at this point. So maybe 6 to 8 months in, I started thinking I want to put it on Steam. It was the first time I ever thought that about a game that I was working on. Just because I thought this game looks good enough that I would be comfortable potentially selling it as a product. And it doesn't have to sell, like I was expecting maybe sell like 2 copies to like a couple of my friends if they wanted to buy it. But I was more thinking about it as like, it would be fun to put something that I'm so passionate about, I'm working on so much, on like a resume. So not just, so I can leverage some of that time. So that was fairly early on that I decided to do that, but it took a long time to actually to get it to the point where I was comfortable putting it up. So I moved to a different city in Canada, and I had to quit my job from some circumstances with the union that I was a part of.
Right.
And
which is this isn't the Zamboni job?
No. So after I graduated, I got a job as like in IT for a few years. So I had to quit, and this was in January of 2023. And I decided, I'd saved up some money. Let's see if I can do this full time for 3 to 6 months. And then I'll post it whenever it's done, and then I'll find a job. That was the plan. So it was like June, it had been 6 months, and I was kind of getting to the point where like I was getting antsy, this isn't going to make any money, and I do need to start working at some point. And that's basically right when PlayStack sent me an email, and we worked out a deal where I was able to do this full time and get paid enough that I didn't have to worry about finding another job at the same time, and I could really flesh this idea fully out it was very shortly after the game went public that they sent me an email. They're very interested. So
excellent. Did you have many other suitors around then?
There were a few other publishers at the time, but it was pretty apparent talking to PlayStack that they get it. They understood, and they're very pro dev, it seemed like. And everyone that I talked to that had worked with them in the past was very high on them as well. And I don't even know if like they had the best, like financially, if theirs was the best deal. I just felt like they had a good plan. They really, I think, understood the game, and I knew that they would be the right choice.
Terrific. And last year was a tricky year for a lot of people to get publishers as well. So clearly it shows there was a lot of interest in the game. You happy with the deal? You still happy with the deal?
Yeah, I think it's easy maybe to be bitter about something where like it blows up so much and none of us were expecting any of this. But I'm so certain that if I didn't sign with them, that it wouldn't have led to any of this. So yeah, it absolutely was worth signing the deal with them for sure.
So tell us then, I guess, about the intervening months. Like, at what stage did you get the idea that, oh, maybe this is going to sell? Because presumably there are wish lists at least adding up in the background, and that's one metric that can give you an idea of your trajectory for launch.
Yeah, well, when they were talking to me, the wish list trajectory was not great. It was, I think it had been live for like a month on the store page, and it was fine, but it wasn't anything where I could like do this as a career or anything. So then streamers started picking it up.
This game, it's really only a demo right now. It's called Balatro. The selling point, the sales pitch that I got was that it was a poker roguelite. That's all I know. That plus an endorsement is all I need.
And it got a lot more attention that summer, and it was pretty clear that like then the wish lists were jumping up to a point where it's like, okay, we need to handle this properly because there's some momentum here, and it's an opportunity. I think that if we make this game correctly, then it could do well.
It must be crazy, LocalThunk, to have your game not be out yet and people are like, this is my favorite game. It must be the most flattering thing in the world.
How did those initial streamers get access? Was there some early demo or early access?
There was an early demo. Yeah. Then there was also a beta playtest. So at the time, the beta had like 300 people in it. It was public, so you could sign up for the queue. So the queue had like 400 people, and I admitted 300. And then after the streamers started playing it, like there were like 30,000 people in this queue. And I was like, I gotta figure something else out because it's not gonna work. So even that summer, we kind of had a tentative plan to release in February with the demo, the official demo, in the Next Fest in February. And the wishlist momentum just kept building, and it was timed perfectly with the Next Fest in February. Yeah, so that's kind of how it built up. I will say that neither PlayStack nor I was expecting anywhere near what ended up happening for launch, though. Our estimate was probably 20 times lower than what ended up happening.
So let's talk about launch then, I guess. You know, the demo's gone up. That's when it sort of came on our radar for sure. When did you start to get the inclination that, oh, this might end up selling at least as much as what we hoped? Was the demo a big part of that, or was it not until you started seeing, the initial day sales?
I honestly, personally didn't believe it would sell as well as it ended up selling until we put it up for sale. I think we got some inklings the day before when all the reviews started coming out from all these like major outlets, which I was not expecting at all.
A 9 from IGN, I saw.
Yeah. This is kind of a world I'm not really familiar with too much. I've learned a lot more about it now, but definitely way better than I was expecting. I even I kind of think that it's overrated. So yeah, I was a little shocked at some of the ratings that were coming out, and I think that's when I started thinking like this could be, I think, a lot bigger than we were initially thinking. But the demos leading up to release did help a ton, because I think even just for the publications that were covering the game, the demo was kind of pervading through these publications ahead of release enough that people wanted to check it out to begin with. And especially the Steam Next Fest in February, we got a lot of media coverage, and we got a ton of players playing the game. So perfect build up right before launch, where it was kind of still fresh in people's minds. So a huge part of the strategy. And we did kind of triple dip, because Balatro was available as a demo for the last 3 Next Fests. It was only an official entry for the last one, but we were able to, I think, take advantage of the coverage and the hubbub.
You are making a lot of these games for yourself and for your buddies, right? What's it like? Obviously, there's a financial element to this, but then also there's pressure. There's expectation from an audience. How have you dealt with, the whirlwind? And at time of recording, you're still in it in many ways.
Yeah, I don't think I feel that much pressure right now, to be honest with you. I think because the audience is already a lot larger than I ever anticipated, like this summer. So I've been dealing with that part of it for a while. And I think I've developed the skills of like understanding what I value, understanding when something is really a design fault versus a design preference. And like most of the criticisms I see now are either like bug reports that I need to fix, which are, it just is what it is, or they're design preferences that I might be able to address, but ultimately, if it changes the game that I wanted to make to begin with, I'm just not going to change. So it's easy for me to deal with that bit, but I don't really feel that much pressure right now for this game.
From a financial perspective, has it caused you? Has it made life a little bit easier, or any pressures you might have had looking down the road? Or indeed with your career, I guess it's obviously had an impact on that. Presumably now, if you want, you can make another game.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing I've been thinking about is how I can make games now. Like it's all I was doing. It's all I really wanted to do for years. So now I just like imagining like, obviously I still want to support this game. I think there's like a lot left to do with Balatro, but I'm just thinking in the future, like, oh, it would be so nice to make a game, spend like 4 years working on it, tell nobody, just like fully explore another idea like this by myself, because there's no external pressure to like, you need to wrap this up, you need to do this by a certain time. I think that part I'm really excited about, and this has afforded me that opportunity.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear you say that. You don't sound like okay, let's spin up a 10-person studio and start making the 3D virtual reality open world version of Balatro.
Yeah, no, I have thought about that, because I could do something like that now, but again, going back to like, to what end? Like, what's the point of me doing this? I love making games. I love figuring out design problems and reinventing the wheel and making mistakes that other people have made and not learning from their mistakes and just trying to do it myself. And I don't want to deprive myself of that if that's really what I enjoy about it. So I'm really excited to make another solo game again.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, because I know that obviously you're probably getting inundated with folks asking to talk to you, and I also understand that you're fairly private. I mean, you go by a pseudonym in your development work as well. So I really appreciate you talking to me. I would love to know though, why the privacy? Is it always been just the part of who you are? You want the work to speak for itself?
I don't really see what purpose it serves, I guess. If I'm more publicly accessible or more out there as a character. I like talking about design. So I think these interviews, I like doing them because I get to talk about my favorite thing, which is game design. But that doesn't require my identity. So beyond that, it just doesn't seem to serve much of a purpose. So
at time of recording, Balatro is available on PC, Mac, Nintendo Switch, PS5, and PS4. I want to say massive thanks to LocalThunk for taking the time out of his busy schedule to talk to us about the development of his terrific game, and thanks to the folks over at the game's publisher, PlayStack, for helping to organize our chat. This episode of Dear Dwyery was expertly produced by NoClip's own in-house Canadian, Jesse Garasha, who is also the best Balatro player in our crew. He's completed it like a dozen times at least, I think, and I, for my deep shame, after, according to Steam, 15 hours, still haven't managed to beat that final blind. But I got really screwed over on the final hand one time, which has been giving me nightmares ever since. This is a new podcast, so we would really appreciate if you could take 2 minutes out of your busy day to review us on whatever podcast service you're using. We want to make this a podcast that grows and lasts for years and tells loads of stories. So if you valued this episode and you want to hear more of them, please help us out. We can only continue to do this show with a healthy audience, so please help get the word out. A massive thanks to all of our patrons over at patreon.com/noclip, without whom we couldn't do any of our documentary or preservation work. Keep your ears peeled for upcoming episodes on New Blood Interactive, Pacific Drive, Warframe, and plenty more. And if you have any suggestions, find me online at Danny O'Dwyer or spam me on NoClip's Patreon-only Discord. Until next time.